Alright, are we ready to go off continent? This video is going to feature the major city of Sydney, Australia, down here on the east coast of Australia. I did a video on Melbourne several years ago, so this is my second look at an Australian city. And the narrative in Australia mirroring North America quite tellingly. They have the Aborigines having existed there for 30,000 years, we're told, and all the evidence of that archaeology gives us. James Cook apparently charting the eastern coast of Australia in 1770, and then we get colonization starting to happen as we get into the 1800s. So a young narrative, much like Canada, I would say. And I did find a population demographic over time. You can see here we have a big gap between 1856 and 1911, where we go from 50,000 people to 600,000. That's quite a stretch here. So again, we're mirroring the population boom that occurred in North America at the same time. You can see it's a very large city, 5 million people plus in the modern day. And special thanks goes out to Darren Jackson, sent me some photos from Dan Unda. On the underside of the spinning ball, of course. This is an early photograph of what I think the inheritors want us to believe these places looked like in that mid to late 1800s. But even in this photograph, you can see the pavers in the streets, you can see the sidewalks and streetlights. So the infrastructure is already there. There's definitely a bit of a dulling down, giving that sort of frontier-esque visual. And apparently this is an early depiction of when James Cook came, and this is what he saw. So I don't know what you want to make of all of that, but I feel like that's setting the narrative. And I think you're going to be blown away by the architecture that we find here in Sydney, Australia. So most of these structures, you can see this photo is coming from 1895, we're told. Most of these structures would have gone up in that 50 to 60 year time period that we saw, where the population booms. This is absolutely incredible as you make your way down this street. These multi-storied structures with their domes and spires, and it's ticking all the boxes of what we expect to see of the old world architecture. You're going to see some buildings that were said to have been built at a very early time period. This photo is supposed to be from 1858. You're getting an old fort narrative thrown at you, very similar again to what we see in North America. So 1812, this one, less than 10,000 people having said to have been living there at the time, and you've got castles going up at that very early time period. Again, a very early structure, but very, very solid looking, even down through time over that 200-year period when this one was said to have been standing. These are girthy buildings, very weighty buildings, and not something that you would expect to have been constructed at that early time period. And I have been told that Sydney has no shortage of underground as far as tunnels go. If you're familiar with the area at all or have any stories to share on that front, please do so in the comment section below. As you can see here, the streetcar narrative in full effect in Sydney, Australia. So what I think we're looking at, and what I suggest we're looking at, is a realm-wide people. And that's not to say it was a homogeneous civilization in the old world. I think culture would have been thriving, and the differences would have been celebrated. And but there was definitely a homogeneous element to the architecture and the infrastructure, and we're seeing that as we go through this research. This is interesting as well, a bit of a chaotic look on the streets, but again, the architecture really, really jumps out at you. I did do a video on Luna Park some time ago as well. Interesting narrative there. I think there's a bit of a brainwashing going on with a lot of the amusement parks being used as we transition from the old world into the new world. Check that video out if you haven't yet. Let me know what you think of the Luna Parks. There's a whole element of shifting over to the sort of space exploration. You have the Luna, the Moon, some interesting correlations there as well for that early time period as well, at the turn of the 20th century. But they have their own Luna Park here in Sydney. I believe there's a disaster element that happened here as well. I'm not sure if it was the 70s or 80s. I covered in that Luna Park video if you want to check that out. And you're definitely going to see mudflood elements to a lot of these structures. As we move forward, you're going to see the sloping streets and the frontages sort of not making sense on the level, if that makes sense. Again, 1819 we have here, the Hyde Park Barracks. So I suspect a lot of these old structures have been repurposed. For instance, this brick building in the background, not looking like it has the same age as this one in the front. So what I think went on is a lot of these structures were modified, demolished, built over top of, de-techified, as I've mentioned in the past, and there's much more to the subterranean aspect than we can see. The Supreme Courthouse, again, 1829, less than 20,000 people living there, but you've got very elaborate architecture. And not fitting the vision of 1800s Australia that we're given in pop culture. And that's really that's what we're targeting here on this channel, is the disconnect between the perception of the past they want us to have and what we're actually seeing when we look at these photographs. The level of technical difficulty involved with a lot of this architecture, infrastructure, and then the chaotic element to the people that we see in some of these photographs. There's a disconnect between the two, is my suggestion here. The Darlington Courthouse, 1844, less than 40,000 people, but apparently enough people to build columns like this and massive block structures. I would definitely wager the top of this one has been leveled off. We have an early chapel with a crypt, 1824, less than 10,000 people, but enough people apparently to build a crypt. And the narrative repeats, and again, these are from Darren Jackson, a lot of these color photos you're seeing. They have the fountain still intact here with the old hospital. A multi-storied structure, 1815, less than 10,000 people living there, but apparently they were capable of building these mansard-style domes. Yes, I'm sure you can detect the sarcasm in my voice, as I doubt the age of much of what we're seeing, and suggest that much of what we're seeing is quite a bit older than we're being told, and that the history of Australia and Sydney is a false start narrative, just like we've seen on the North American continent. You're definitely going to see some old world bangers as we proceed through the file, but again, early time period, infrastructure well intact, could easily be 100 plus years old at the time we're looking at this photograph. None of this looking new. What does look new is the stupid signs on the side of the buildings, really giving us the indication that we have a reset going on here, and that these buildings are being repurposed for different reasons other than what they were originally built for. You see it again here, and it's a narrative that repeats itself. Some fantastic street scenes of Sydney here from the 1800s. I have to wonder what you'd be thinking at that time, walking down the street looking up at these domes, and are you being told that these were built 10 years prior to the photograph taken? Were you around then? Have you just entered the city? Do these people even question their surroundings, or is it almost like humanity's in a stunned state, like in a daze, and people are just sort of being relocated to a region that has the new dates on the building and has a story to go along with it, and these people just going along with the story and establishing a life, reproducing, passing on that story, and voila, you have the modern day. Not really a lot of introspection is my guess as to what was, as to the history of many of these places. And I suspect they've kept us in a bit of a state of survival where we don't have time to think about these things. I don't suspect, I know. We don't have time, or we don't have the means to research or doubt these things either. You know, it's we have the luxury in the modern day of being able to compile a file such as this and interact with people from all over the world, people who've been to these places, who have their own stories. So we're able to piece together a narrative that I think wasn't even possible for the longest time. And that's, I think, why it's happening now. But again, very wide streets, very, very large architecture, spectacular. 1890. We don't have a population. I would guess it's somewhere in the range of 400,000 people at this point, based on the growth between that 50 to 60 year period, where we don't get the population demographics for some reason. I'm not sure why they're able to give us accurate demographics from 1796 up until 1856, but then nothing until 1911. I find that suspicious. Again, look at the architecture. It's absolutely incredible. And of course, the Queen Victoria narrative, the British colonial narrative, very, very strong here in Australia. And much of the early resetting having been done by fur trading companies, and especially in North America. You have a gold rush narrative. You have, in Australia, you have the penal colonies being set up. A very suspicious part of the narrative, I think, as well for Australia, is to imply that their ancestors were criminals. It's almost a way of having people turn their backs on the past, a way of forgetting, and a shame ritual almost going on there, I think. Certainly not looking like infrastructure that convicts would be putting up. Although we've seen the narrative in North America as well, where they tell us, you know, the inmates from a prison built the state capitol in Arkansas, and we've seen that in other places as well. This is I believe it's a bank building. I couldn't find the name of it, but I believe it still stands. Kind of obscure. I'm surprised it was difficult to find anything more on this one. But you stick a dome on the corner, and you kind of curve the corner, because that's what you do in the late 1800s in Sydney, apparently. And this is giving us a good look at the regrading going on here. Here especially, you got kind of a half window door, not sure what that's supposed to be. You also get a bunch of statue work going on in the corner, so the ornamentation is ticking all the boxes. This is Australian fire insurance building, apparently. Decapitated, because I have a rendering of what it once looked like, and that's apparently what it looked like before they decided to hide the tower from you. And of course they'll say that it took some damage or whatever it might be, and it wasn't safe anymore, so they had to remove everything up here and remove the statues that used to be here and here. That's just seems to be how it goes. So the Anthony Hordern and Sons Palace Emporium, this is apparently the original. Now again, we get this fire narrative going on where the original is destroyed and it becomes justification for the construction of the second one. So this is a rendering of the original, and then they'll tell us that this guy was built not long after. This is the second version of the looks like a Palace Emporium, they're calling it. So all sorts of like who builds a store like this to be a palace at that time period? I don't know. To me it just seems silly. So this one's going up right after apparently the first one is destroyed in a fire. The writing again looking secondary to the exquisite architecture that we're seeing here. But they do give us a construction photo, and many of the construction photos, this is 1905, we're told, many of the construction photos coming out of the historical societies in Australia, and we see this a lot as well. There have to be an official photo in some sort of historical society, which to me implies that there's some trickery going on. Of course, you have no way of knowing that this is that same location. So to me, it's absolutely absurd. But we will continue. And there it is again, the Anthony Hardern Palace. Again, we see that street shot. This is an iconic street shot. Fantastic. What do you think of the scenery in Sydney? I think we're ticking old world boxes off here. Most certainly. We're going to be getting to a couple more of these as we roll on forward here. And again, you're seeing the slopage going on. You're seeing how these windows here most likely are built the same way as these. You have an entrance down here on the right. And yeah, the street looking like it's that the building was there before the grading went on, is what it looks like to me. This is a commercial bank, early time period. The road's looking covered in dirt, but it's interesting because you get solid curb work, and then you've got raised dirt roads. So I think there's these eventually get cleared off, and the brick gets exposed. And then you have the rail cars and the rail lines and all that kind of stuff. This is a Bank of Commerce as well. Spectacular looking structure. And again, we have the lower element here to the building itself. Alright, we'll keep moving forward. Quite a bit to cover here in Sydney, so I'll try to move quicker just to get it all in. We have the railway. We'll see this a little bit further on. They say it's the largest railway station in the British Commonwealth. We'll see more of that near the end. The St. Mary Cathedral. No slouch. Some of the interior for you. Classic cymatic patterns in the window, old world. Screaming at us, old world. You got the pipe organ in the foreground here. Alright, there is the Central Railway Station. This is apparently a construction photo, we're being told, because you can see the cribbing and scaffolding going on here. Look how old the stonework on the bridge looks, even on the tower itself. All looking very old to me. And they've put the clock in at this point, and apparently this is what it was like before. This sort of a, again, they're doing that before and after, I don't know, perception, deception, I guess you can call it, I think. To give you a false sense of these things starting at that time. This is an interesting old world, new world juxtaposition here too. You can tell that this top portion, with all the signage on it, certainly not... oh, I'm not sure if that's behind this building. It might be, actually, now that I look at it. But it certainly looks like it's been placed on top. But not looking right, compared to... even this small building here with the conical dome on the corner. Very much old world. And, of course, the brick-paved streets. So the Chief Secretary's office, you can see here. Again, that British colonial narrative screaming at us. With the crown on top. And at this point it's been removed, so you can see it's from the archives, a lot of these photos. Massive structure, really. Multi-story, very, very intense building materials. Here it is in the modern day. Walking down the streets of Sydney. What are you thinking as you walk by this thing? Have you given it a second thought? If you've been there, if you live there? These are spectacular old world structures that amazingly have made it down through time. And I think these are supposed to be the same structures again. And then we're getting... It's like they do this a lot too, where they build onto these structures. Like they just had this and then they built onto it this way. It really doesn't make sense in the world of building to just have these additions. Sometimes you see it vertically as well, where they've added to a building. They've added 5, 6, 7 stories vertically to a building. It's absolutely absurd. And this is what the officialdom gives us for construction. Make of that what you will. Because this is just showing us old world splendor, I think. Oh, right, we have St. Patrick's Church with the lower area down below the street, of course. And instead of the black top hats, we've got the white hats and the shorter hats here. Bit of a different look in Australia, but narrative is the same. Alright, I'll move on from the structure here. Here's another construction photo where they'll tell us the dome is being built. Take a look at the, when I zoom in. What do you think? We've got some brushing going on here. Something doesn't look right. Look along the ridge line here. Make of that what you will. I don't believe it. Nice look at the entrance. There's a top hat. All sorts of hats, I suppose, in Sydney. There's a classic butt flood look here where you can see how much higher the building is on this left side than it is on the right as it swoops down and the window down here gets covered up. That's what's screaming at you. Clearly signs that there's been a regrading going on here at some point. And it certainly could have happened with the old world civilization, the regrading itself. I think a lot of the colonialism and exploration was a capturing of what remained of the old world, or who remained of the old world, and a horrific period, really, and a sending back to the Stone Age, if you will, of many of the people that did exist in these areas, and then a displacement of many people with a false narrative that many people had existed in these areas much longer than we're told. There's a lot of lies, I think, a very, very coordinated effort to misrepresent our history. And I do have people ask sometimes, why would they do this? Why would they want to misrepresent our history? I think it has to do with maintaining control over our perception. Because that is how they control the reality here, is by controlling our collective perception. And that's why you get that real panic. Here's another construction photo. You get a real panic when people start deviating from the norm. So the norm is is what they desire for us to believe about this place, about ourselves, and that's where the strong effort for censorship, and especially in the modern day in the last 10 years, having to do with them losing control of the narrative of where we are and who we are, what's really going on, who's in charge. They're banking on us not being aware of that deception. Every time we decide to doubt ourselves and to doubt their existence and what they've done to us, then we're only really propping up the illusion. Propping up their illusion. We're not helping ourselves when we do that. The Department of Lands building. Again, these massive structures, statues sticking off the sides. Early time period, looking like it hasn't aged at all over this time period since this photo was taken. Massive domes. Yet another church. Interesting, because you might call that a Richardsonian look almost. A bit different. Very unique, actually. Reminding me of some of the North American Richardsonian Romanesque styling that we do see quite often over on the North American continent. We'll keep moving forward. Education department. Nice looking structure, multi-story. but the narrative repeats, doesn't it? The federal government house, looking like a castle. Castles in Sydney. There it is in the modern day. Spectacular looking structure. Fort Denison, 1859, out in the middle of the water. What do you think? Bit of meltage, maybe? Who knows? And there it is in the modern day. That's pretty early to be building something like this. And again, there's 50,000 people living in Sydney at the time, and they're able to do this kind of thing. With all the other buildings going up that we're told. Fort Phillip. An early public school from the 1870s. Because, of course, it's easy to put columns on the front of your public school in the 1870s. The Gaiety Theatre. No slouch. A quick look at the Garden Palace. It's a part of the exposition there. And, of course, the narrative repeats. 1879, Sydney had the International Exposition. It had over 1 million visitors. No doubt a setting of the colonial narrative, and you can see here this thing burns and is demolished in 1882. No doubt they'll tell us this was in a temporary structure, but not looking any different than the permanent structures. So if you thought it was only going on in North America, think again. We've got this same narrative. It's a carbon copy story, really. Oh, let's move forward to a couple hotels here. Australia Hotel, just zoom in, was built in 1889 to 1891, so we've got about 2.5 year time period on them building this massive structure. And this one sees the wrecking ball in the early 70s. Of course, why wouldn't you demolish this thing? I mean, it's been standing for 80 years. I'm sure it was just decrepit at that point. Amazing looking structure. Yeah, 2.5 years to build that. In 1890. Come on. Hotel Metropole. Built 1888, I should say, to 1889. In less than 12 months, they built this puppy. I'm just going to leave that right there for you. And this was also demolished in 1970, so right at that same time period where they're really erasing history. That everybody's hopped up on psychedelics. Nobody knows what's going on, and just tear it all down. Tear it all down. The pattern repeats itself. There's a pretty good look at the Treasury. You can get quite a slope going on down this street, that's for sure. Interesting. The library, Fisher Library. I think it's a part of the university there, which we'll see moving forward. This is apparently a construction photo, just to prove that it's being built at the time period they tell us. Don't believe it. Doesn't look right to me. There's some of the interior of the Fisher Library. Amazing. And this is a newer Fisher Library, apparently. That's what they do. We turn it into brutalist architecture, soul-crushing architecture, as Tucker Carlson has said on several occasions, and I think he's right. I don't know if he's seeing the old world the way we're seeing it, but he's definitely grasping or catching on to the change that has occurred from the old to the new. And I'm hoping as we move forward in time here, more and more people will begin to question our past, the story that we've been given, and really sort of explore what's really going on here, or what really went on here. Now, I have this marked as an orphanage. It's also Prince Alfred Hospital, so I think it had a dual purpose at one point back in time. There it is again. But definitely saw this as a place for them to store the orphans as they were integrating back into society, of course. Post office now, a quick look at the post office. This is apparently built in 1874. Again, we don't have population demographics from that time period, but you're looking at a couple 100,000 people living there. Let's look at this post office. full view. There you go. Soak that one in, folks. Soak it in. You tell me, does this make sense for them to build a post office like this? Was the might of the British Crown that immense that they were able to do this all over the place? And of course the architecture looking much like what we've seen in the Americas at a time when we said the British Crown had no influence in the 1800s. This is a massive structure. Again, we're going to get here's the side of the building, right? This is this side, the right side of the building, and apparently then they choose to build onto it back there. I don't believe it. That's not how you build. Makes zero sense. The amount of infrastructure you'd have to dig out to make sure all of this, first of all, stands the test of time uniformly. So they're telling us that the far side was already intact, and then they just tacked this portion on. Makes no sense in the building process to do it in that manner. I think we saw that one already. Another part of the Prince Alfred Hospital. Or the hospital, getting that nice little top hat look going on, which often this stuff gets destroyed and these get flattened, these buildings. And of course you have the hard-working hospital workers at the time. What's really going on there? I have my suspicions. Looking at a synagogue now. Impeccable structure. Another look at it. Now we see it sandwiched in between the modern day structures. Beauty looking structure though. Moving on to the town hall. 1889 they decide the post office was grand, but the town hall is also going to have to be grand. So they built this in 1889. Apparently this is a construction photo. What do you think? Somebody drew in some skeletons for the framework there. I don't know. No slouch though, that's for sure. You can see the church there in the background. And look at also the infrastructure out front here, the landscaping. This is beautiful. Really, really perfect. Perfect work. Town Hall, Sydney, Australia. You know, South Africa has quite a bit of buildings like this as well. I think this is... I'll try to put out a South Africa video as well, because it's interesting to get that perspective on the underside of the spinning ball. There's the pipe organ in the town hall. Because it needs a pipe organ. It's not a church. Why? Are they playing music in the town hall? Who decided on that? Old world. This is the Trust building. Unique looking structure, some small domes on top, quite large, and looking very unlevel, let's say, down at the bottom. So this is, I think they call it the quadrangle, or part of the quadrangle at the university in Sydney. And they provide us with construction photo. This is apparently a construction photo because they have, you know, statues that are going to go on down here. I don't know about that. Sus. And there we have it in the modern day. Here they're trying to show us. They're providing us with clear indication that the construction went on at that time period. And here are these items before they were installed. You see a lot of these quadrangles in many of the post-secondary institutions. My suggestion, of course, is that the post-secondary institutions are gatekeeping the truth of our past and who we are, and largely responsible for the false narrative that has been pushed upon the people here. 1854. Less than 50,000 people living in Sydney, but they decide they're going to build like this. What do you think? Does it make any sense at all? Can we please make it make sense? Alright, last but not least, one of my all-time favorites, the realm over. We have the Queen Victoria Markets. Built between 1893 and 1898, we are told. I really want you to take this in, understand how absurd this is to even consider them having constructed this in the late 1800s. The amount of domes on this alone is absolutely ridiculous, and all of this going on, how many stories up from street level? It's got to be 4 stories there at least before you get to the top of this. It's just a market. What kind of budget do they have to be deciding as a city to construct a market in this fashion? And of course they'll say it was for the Royal Majesty Queen Victoria. All these places are just getting dedicated to Queen Victoria. To the victor go the spoils, is what I say. And no truer is it than in Sydney, Australia. And what we're seeing is the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha stamping a false timeline and a false history on this location. And I would just like to declare that we're not buying it and we're taking it back. We the people. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. This has been an old world exploration. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and comment. I believe we are in the process of remembering who we really are and casting off the shackles of illusion. Until next time.